we had talked about, yesterday we were at 63, and my class is in a different spot, so I've got to kind of reset for it.
Who's ahead?
You guys.
We're ahead by what?
What's that?
I guess
Yeah, they get that's next week's schedule, so you can see I'm gonna kind of wrap up legacies of the civil rights movement by Monday. Civil rights on the court, I might also, that might be about the war in court, but I think I'm also gonna bring in the women's liberation movement to show you how civil rights, it kind of spiderwebs beyond just African American groups, because you can get to homosexual rights in '69 already. It's Stonewall rights in New York. Women's lib movement's really starting to pick up by 1963 as well. So I think I'll try to use Tuesday for that. Then the beginning of the 60s, Kennedy's assassination. I know that's the end of 63, but I think that's when a lot of historians say that's the 60s, when things start to spiral and get wild. So we'll start that on Wednesday, and LBJ and his Great Society, and then maybe next Friday we'll just listen to some counterculture music, you know, and just do all sorts of stuff like that. So bring your favorite late 60s protest song, I guess, next Friday. What's that?
What's the
As long as they're not pot brownies, all right? That's what it can be. From the 60s, you know. We're in the 60s, so we got to be careful with that stuff. I don't have anything down for outline this week. I think outline.
Somebody's calling me. Is it a spam?
Should I answer it?
Sure.
You?
Yeah.
Answer it. Like,
How do I just hang up on it?
why is that your ringtone?
It's not my ringtone. My sound's off.
It's just a loud
Before
block.
you gotta hear my sound tone when I forgot to turn it off. And just it's like, oh, listen to that music because we were talking about music today.
Did you guys? I've shared this with English teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. While I show you a video clip, I'll look it up on my thing. So let me multitask now.
Oh, so is it good? That's good. So I barely started it.
Yeah, I think it's the end of next week.
Oh,
Where is that?
That's beautiful.
I have 3 sections left.
Did
Good
you
job,
guys?
Brendan.
I shared this with
You've not
English
started.
teachers a few years ago. They've been using it. Have you guys looked at a literacy test?
No.
Okay.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, that's what Hein. I know I gave Hein one.
Oh, we did? Is that something we actually did last year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure that she still did that way. I mean, if you ever want to look at a literacy test, if you didn't get to in your English class, I put it on Google Classroom for you guys to see. What I'd like to do today is now walk you through how Lyndon Johnson is a fascinating president. If I say Truman, if I'm being honest, Truman's my favorite president. I know I'm editorializing there. Johnson I'm most fascinated by, because on the one hand, he's going to make tremendous strides for civil rights, more so than you could argue anybody in our history as a president. But he's also going to be just tragic Shakespearean and a bold-faced liar about Vietnam. And so he wanted to be like FDR. He even, he made sure everybody in his family had the initials LBJ. So Lady Bird Johnson, Linda Baines Johnson, that's his daughter. He's Lyndon B. Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson. So everything was monogrammed LBJ because his hero was FDR. And so he kind of wanted to be the next iteration of that. And we'll look at that. Obviously next week, I'm on Thursday, we'll look at what he tries to do. But we will look at aspects of that already today with what Johnson's trying to do for civil rights after Kennedy's assassination.
So he was Kennedy's vice president?
He was.
Okay.
And most people in the election of '60 thought he should have been the presidential ticket and Kennedy should have been the VP. He assumed the delegates were going to vote for him, and he was wrong. The Kennedys did an incredible coordination job of getting delegates around the country to commit to them in this election of '60. And what's weird about Johnson is he did not want to be vice president because he was the most powerful man in the Senate since the late '40s. But somebody told him, and I can't wait to hear Peyton's response to this next hour. Somebody had mentioned to him, they said, Lyndon, at this age, your best bet to be president would maybe be vice president, because we've had 6 presidents who died in office, or 7 presidents who died in office. And so she's very conspiratorial, and with him dying in Texas, and it's Lyndon Johnson's home state, and there's of course there's a conspiracy about LBJ. Yeah. There's just a lot of coincidence, but in terms of there's no evidence. There's no evidence.
That just means they did a good job.
Yeah. One of the first things he works with Congress to do is what's deeply unpopular. Can you tell what this is? I don't know if you can. I'll give you a hint. All right, if you need a hint.
Oh,
It costs money to vote.
Poll tax.
Yeah, it's called a head tax. It can also be called a poll tax. Who are they trying to wean out from voting?
Or the poor people.
Poor people. Poor people. All right. Now, it disproportionately hits minorities.
Yeah.
But in a way, poll taxes historically have been used to try to wean out poor people from voting. The newest iteration we've seen of these are things like voter ID laws, where you have to have a picture ID, a government picture ID. Now again, I would suspect many of you are like, that's pretty basic. But what do most of us use for our picture ID law?
drivers.
Now start to think about poor people. A lot of poor people don't have driver's
Oh,
licenses.
because they don't drive.
And I'm not just saying black people, I'm saying just poor people don't have driver's license. So Kansas has been at the foreground of leading voter ID charge in the last 10 years. But historians look at that as it's kind of in the vein of what this is, because it keeps poor people from voting, because you really have to go do legwork to go get a government issued ID, picture ID. We just don't have enough cases of voter fraud in our history. There is some, don't get me wrong. Every election has an element of voter fraud, small amount, but not to the case where it changes elections. I mean, I think Kansas over the last 30 years have had 2 cases, and one of them had to do with a person who moved to Colorado. They came back because of a sick relative. They voted here, and they thought they were still allowed to vote here because they had lived here a year prior. I mean, so it's not like some big, like, whoa, it's a huge problem. I mean, so the first thing Johnson was able to work with Congress on to get through the states after Kennedy's assassination is the 24th Amendment. And the 24th Amendment is abolishing poll taxes in federal elections. Now in state elections, that can still happen, but in federal elections, poll taxes are now legal. In other words, a head tax. He worked then throughout '64 to push through one of the most momentous pieces of legislation in American history. It's the Civil Rights Bill, and this is what we mean. He was using Kennedy's assassination as kind of the trumpet call or the clarion call to rally the nation to honor Kennedy and the legacy of Jack Kennedy. And so here's just a summary of the Civil Rights Bill of '64. Look at Title II. Title II of it. Outlawed discrimination in hotels, motels, restaurants, theaters, all other public accommodations engaged in interstate commerce. Now the exemption is private clubs. In other words, think of like a country club or something like that. But anybody who conducts business, something like Title VI, discrimination prevents discrimination by government agencies that receive federal funds. Well, think about who receives federal funds.
Schools.
Universities. Schools can receive it. You can't, so in other words, you can't have any kind of discrimination again. So this is how important, and then they create the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They are the enforcement mechanism. Their job is to hear claims and enforce it, and if it's a repeated problem, this is where states can be punished. It's hugely important. You could make a case this law alone ends de jure segregation or de jure discrimination. I can't think of a more important piece of civil rights legislation, maybe other than abolishing slavery. On the back side, you'll notice there's more. A lot of people will reference Title IX, and I'll come back and talk about this next Tuesday or Wednesday. Title IX, if you look at the second paragraph, a 1972 addition to Title IX states no person in the U.S. shall on the basis of sex be excluded from participation in or denied benefits or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal aid. So for my females out there who like athletics, Title IX. This is, what do you want to say, the Magna Carta of allowing women to participate in sports and things in high school and in college. Prior to Title IX, there would not be women's sports or anything like that. I mean, my sister, she was born in '72, and I remember growing up, she joined a soccer league, and there were very few girls, and it was kind of weird, like, girls are playing soccer? And this was like 1980, 81, they're like, that's weird, why would girls play soccer? Girls don't play sports. And so I just remember hearing that as a kid, that these were new, but look where we're at today, 40 years later, and it's like, yeah, everybody. But that's how quick and how influential legislation can change the day-to-day norms of things. And so that's what we talk about. Now, this is him signing the bill, and you'll notice prominent people up front. Here's Bobby Kennedy. Dr. King is right here. In fact, I don't know if this works or not. I never know how these things work. Are you gonna pop it? Yeah, there you go. This is a couple months before he died. He died in 73. This is at the end of 72.
We must not allow the visibility of a few to diminish the efforts to satisfy what is our real responsibility to the still unseen millions who are faced with that basic problem of being black in a white society. So our objective must be to assure that all Americans play by the same rules, and all Americans play against the same odds. Who among us would claim that that's true today? I feel this is the first work of any society which aspires to greatness. So let's be on with it.
This is Texan. Let's be on with it.
Injustice. We know there's intolerance. We know there's discrimination and hate and suspicion. And we know there's division among us. But there is a larger truth. We have proved that great progress is possible. We know how much still remains to be done. And if our efforts continue, and if our will is strong, and if our hearts are right, and if courage remains our constant companion, then, my fellow Americans, I am confident we shall overcome.
Notice the language we use there. That's the language of King in the SCLC. The gospel, we shall overcome. So he even uses that same phrase when calling on Congress to pass the Civil Rights Bill. Right, so that's step one. Step two, there's not enough votes to put it in the Civil Rights Bill. There's not enough votes by Congress just to deal with voting itself. Voting has to be treated separate. And so, kind of what voting looks like. This is a scene from Selma, the film Selma.
You work for Mr. Dunn down at the rest home, ain't that right? Yes. You know what old Dunn say when I tell him one of his gals down here starting a fuss?
I ain't starting no fuss, I'm just here trying to register to vote.
Recite the Constitution's preamble. You know what a preamble is?
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union.
How many county judges in Alabama?
67.
Name them.
Name them. So that was always the question, is when you look at a literacy test, that's the example you wanna kind of put this up against, is when you look at the literacy test, I asked the students, and I think I already talked to you guys about this, what's the passing score? Right? So you have these kind of questions.
Really?
68 questions. What's the passing score?
100.
Huh?
No.
Know your Southern history here. And there's your hint. He is your hint.
Oh, is yours?
Oh, 500.
Whatever the county clerk deems it to be. It's up to local. Remember, everything south is local control. Whatever the county clerk deems it to be. So you could score 100 theoretically. All right. That's the thing. It's if you don't want somebody to vote, you can devise a way. You can create ways to ensure people don't vote. And so this is the next great battlefield: is to look at how do you? And this is the African American community. How do we get the right to vote? And this is going to be Selma. Selma's going to bring this to the public's attention, this March on Selma. Out of 15,000 African Americans registered to vote in Selma, Alabama, only 383 were able to actually ever complete that process of voting. And so there are beatings, there's arrests, there's one murder. There's going to be a march. And this march is going to cross a bridge, Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's named after a Confederate general. And on the other side of that bridge is going to be state militia waiting for, state police waiting for.
Some of them march is the culmination of a long struggle for voting rights that triggers a national outcry.
Guy in the trench coat's John Lewis, who he's listening.
Is beamed across the nation, across the world, as the forces in Alabama try to turn back the idea that black people want to participate in the political process.
It's a 50-mile march, so it's a walk, 50 miles.
We had the right to march from Selma to Montgomery and to be protected. The governor, the sheriff department, and others, but not interfere.
The march starts in Selma, crosses the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and makes it to 54 miles up through Lowndes County.
Down Highway 8.
Think about what would you walk 50 miles for?
All the way to Montgomery. And all the time we would stop to rest. Some brought food. It meant that some people were so determined to assist us.
I had our rabbi speak to our religious class last week. He showed a picture with King in it at the Selma March. And he said, if you look at that old kind of crinkly guy behind next to him, that's my dad. He's a Jew. His dad's was a rabbi, and Jews were very much involved in this too.
Packed them up and moved them up to the next campsite. And the crew that did the same thing with the kitchen and food, utensils and all that.
Also, the whites who were determined to honor and discourage those persons who were white who would participate in the march.
But during the course of this campaign, even before the march is finished, Lyndon Baines Johnson takes the airwaves before a joint session of Congress and announces that he's going to put before Congress a voting rights bill.
It was a great feeling of accomplishment, knowing that we had done something that we felt would be beneficial to all persons because of their color. So they were black, white, red, and blue.
You felt that something great was being accomplished. You just felt there was enormous happiness and enormous joy that you finally arrived, that even though all those things had gone against you, you was finally there.
Moving down Dexter Avenue in Montgomery to the very, very right marched Jose Williams, oldest daughter. I marched next to him. Mrs. King marched next to me. Dr. King marched next to his wife, Dr. Ralph Bunch, the first African American Nobel Peace Prize winner, marched next to him. And to his right marched Mrs. Abernathy. To her right marched Elizabeth Ralph Abernathy. To his right marched John Lewis, who today is United States Congressman from Georgia. And to his right marched A. Philip Randolph.
A. Philip Randolph, leader in World War II.
Hear Dr. King make that speech that day.
Culminates with Martin Luther King's iconic speech at the steps of the state capitol. He asks, how long, not long?
I sat on that platform, looked out over that sea of humanity. I don't know how many thousand people out there. I had a feeling of great triumph and victory. But now, all persons, regardless of their color, they have a right to participate in the political process that governs their lives.
So it's almost now, we think Selma is almost synonymous with voting rights when you hear the term Selma, Alabama. Any questions on the march itself? There's a film that just came out, probably 6-7 years ago. African-American filmmaker Ava DuVernay. She's a great filmmaker. It's really well done. That could be a possibility post-AP exam if you want to see. If we're going to watch, I said we might watch a movie or two. Selma's a great one to watch. Take a look at the reality. What's the Voting Rights Act of '65 is. Let me come back to this. The Voting Rights Act, first of all, ends literacy tests. Literacy tests are illegal now at this point. Poll taxes, grandfather clauses. And if local registers wouldn't enroll African Americans to vote, the president can send federal examiners who would. So as a result, that's what I meant to show you. Look at the transformation of percent of voting age blacks prior to the Voting Rights Act of '65 and then after it. Like look at Texas. So 57% were eligible to vote. But look at that number afterwards, 83%. You go back to 1940, 0.5% in Louisiana, they get almost up to 60% after the Voting Rights Act. That's a revolution.
Why does Texas drop so much in '76?
Part of it is the percent who are eligible to vote, and this is where statistics can get tricky. Part of it is states will start to try to create barriers. It's how well the federal government enforces it. Part of it, their numbers are increasing at the time. And some of it even gets to the next part of our subject matter, which is your day-to-day life doesn't change, so you're not voting because you don't think it makes a difference. So we have all sorts of factors that play in that one.
What year was the Civil War?
65, March, and then the Voting Rights Act goes through in August of 65. And then you can see on the 50th anniversary, here is John Lewis right here. He's the one who marched with King. He was the congressman from Georgia. So they recreated parts of the march walking across Edmund Pettus Bridge to kind of remember what that march was about. Now, those two, Civil Rights Bill of '64, it ends de jure segregation. Voting Rights Act of '65, now African Americans are protected by federal examiners to ensure that they have the right to vote. We have seen since 2015 the Supreme Court start to dismantle the Voting Rights Act, saying, we're past racism, we don't need to worry about federal examiners coming in anymore. So we're actually seeing a rise now at state levels of more barriers coming up for poor and minorities. But the photo ID is one of the cases. And so we have this fight right now in our country of, no, we need to make sure all aspects of Voting Rights Act of '65 are still in place because we're not post-racial America. And others are saying, yeah, we've made it past it. We're not Jim Crow South anymore. So that's part of the contemporary fight we see in our country right now. What I want to finish with, just to introduce this today, is, and it kind of piggybacks off what Baylor was saying. Things aren't changing in your day-to-day life, though. Right? Yes, you have the right to vote. Yes, de jure segregation is technically over, but it's still about your day-to-day existence. It's still about life. And where we want to finish is with what just floored LBJ after the Voting Rights Act is that we see violence break out in cities. And probably one of the biggest riots was in Watts. basically LA. From August 11th through the 16th, 34 people dead, over 1,000 injured, 4,000 arrested, over 1,000 buildings were destroyed, $40 million in damage. And this is, we see this in the summers of 65, 66, 67, 68. So this idea of, remember, when you're impoverished, you don't have air conditioning, you're outside, your temper tends to be shorter in the summers. Interactions with law enforcement occur more in the summers when you're outside. There's a whole bunch of factors at work of why violence starts to tick up in the 60s. LBJ appointed a commission to investigate these riots called the Kerner Commission. And it's similar to what we heard to secure these rights back in 1947. It said, Mr. President, there's frustrated hopes of blacks who they still feel like second-class citizens, and they live in a cage of poverty. And they don't see any escape, any opportunity for better housing, better education, better jobs, and that there needs to be a better government response to try to help combat poverty. And so Johnson, he's going to launch what we call the War on Poverty. And we'll study that next week with the Great Society when we get to Thursday. It's very tough to fight an abstraction. The war on drugs, the war on terrorism, the war on poverty. These are really tough wars to fight politically because there's so many factors at work. You can see the city of Detroit is essentially never recovered from the riots in 67 and 68. You can see where riots occurred in inner cities. Wichita had one in 67, but they're all over the country. And that kind of gets us to, it's like, wait a second, nonviolent resistance, come on, what about King? And there's a split. There's been a split already, and we're just seeing this manifest. Let me show you real quick one clip of Malcolm X and what he's starting to promote in the early 60s, and it's gaining traction.
The so-called American Negro has to be. I charge the white man with being the greatest troublemaker on earth. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you, bring back a verdict of guilty and...
When Lulu met auditorium, overflowing, thousands of people about an organization I knew nothing about. I thought
Nation of Islam is out of Harlem
when I saw it.
Have you ever been accused?
under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad.
Yes.
Do you think you are preaching?
No.
What are you preaching, sir?
True.
They call Mr. Muhammad a hate teacher because he makes you hate dope and alcohol. They call Mr. Muhammad a black supremacist because he teaches you and me not only that we're as good as the white man, but better than the white man. Yeah, better than the white man. You are better than the white man. And that's not saying anything. That's not saying you don't want just to be equal with him. Who is he to be equal with? You look at his skin. You can't compare your skin with his skin. While your skin looks like gold beside his skin.
So you're going to get leaders like Malcolm X who are speaking to a very different audience, this is much more black power, black nationalism, and he calls whites blonde-haired, blue-eyed devils. Now he will go to Mecca to do the pilgrimage that Muslims are called to do, and he'll soften his stance quite a bit, and actually start to work with King, but he will end up being assassinated by members of the Nation of Islam who didn't like how popular he was getting within the Nation of Islam. They actually expel him from that group because it was Elijah Muhammad's organization, but Malcolm X is a dynamic speaker, an amazing public speaker. So he gained more headlines, more media attention, and so in February of 65, he is assassinated while giving a speech in Harlem by fellow members of the Nation of Islam. It's still always up for debate about who the actual gunmen were. They never really arrested anybody. You'll get other groups like SNCC start to radicalize. I want to show you the Black Panthers. Imagine even comic books jump in on this and create a superhero character, Black Panther.
The Black Panther Party rose from concern about the increase of police violence against black citizens.
This is in Oakland,
California. In 1966, political activist Huey Newton founded the Black Panther Party with the help of his Oakland City College classmate Bobby Seale and his childhood friend David Hilliard. Unlike the nonviolent movement of Martin Luther King, the Black Panthers believed that blacks should act aggressively in their own defense when police violated their rights.
So the concept is this, basically. A whole black nation has to be put together as a black army.
Newton and Seale very much understood this as a matter of rights. And so part of how they would police the police was that they would carry guns, because in 1966 in California, it was legal to carry an unconcealed weapon.
California gun laws have changed quite a bit since
It
then.
was tape recorders, legal case books. The part of the idea behind policing the police and the police patrols and then educating the community was about what are your rights vis-a-vis the police, and making the police have to live up to those rules and to those rights, and kind of transforming the relationship between the police as sort of an occupying force or a force that was sort of not there to protect necessarily the black community, and beginning to say, no, we are not going to allow this kind of policing.
And you can see the Black Power symbol, kind of black nationalism. This will be something that scares a lot of middle class white America. And this is going to be something, what we mean about the whole split, the whole split, a figure that kind of symbolizes this. Anybody know his name? Nope. His name's Cassius Clay. He's from Louisville. He becomes a heavyweight champion of the world and becomes close friends with Malcolm X, converts to Islam, and converts his name to Muhammad Ali. That's right. So part of white America will say, I'm calling him Cassius Clay. That's what his mom named him, Cassius Clay. But as a religious convert to Islam, Muhammad Ali. And that he speaks, and he'll go to prison in '67 and give up his heavyweight belt rather than go fight in Vietnam. And he'll become like how many athletes could we say today will actually go out and be willing to lose their money for a cause they stand up for? No. This is always I think we have more social activism in athletes today than we did in, like, Michael Jordan, greatest maybe basketball player ever, but he was all about corporate Nike, get his sponsorships. He wouldn't speak out on social issues. I think this generation's done more. I think somebody like a LeBron James might have speaks out more. But so basically say, I'm just gonna go to jail because I'm not gonna go fight in Vietnam for a country that doesn't even love me. This is the 1960s. We see the rise of athletes like Bill Russell, Lou Alcindor converts to Islam, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and of course the big one, Jim Brown and Muhammad Ali. And so we're seeing this kind of split in the black movement. And so some are moving towards more black nationalism. Notice this audience isn't the audience of the Deep South that King was going after. This is the audience of the North. And so what we want to look at on Monday then is where the civil rights movement's at by about 67, 68, because you got to throw Vietnam into all this as well now. And it's causing quite a bit of a stir. So at the 68 Olympics, when they give the fist, I mean, this angered a lot of fellow athletes, this angered a lot of Americans, because it's kind of the symbol for black power. And part of what Malcolm X was preaching was black separatism. I don't think white America wants us to live with them, so maybe we should live separate. Go watch the film Malcolm X this weekend. It should be streaming somewhere. It came out in 1992. Denzel Washington plays him. He's unbelievable, and it does a great job of showing you the rise of Malcolm X and what a controversial figure he was, but what he was aiming for. I think he gets lost a little bit in the flow of MLK. All right, well, why don't we stop there today, and then on Monday, then we'll get to kind of the legacies of the civil rights.